right. So my name is Sarah Helson, and I am the program coordinator for Detroit Audubon. And we are so excited to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have, this is probably our 5th or 6th virtual presentation. So we're getting better each time, but do let us know if you have any suggestions. We have just some quick things about Zoom in case this is your first time. On the bottom left, you can mute yourself and turn off your video. We are screen sharing with you, but if you can exit the full screen view if you have other things you want to check by going to the top. And on the right side is our chat, and please introduce yourself. And if you have any questions, you are welcome to add those there. We will have some time for Q&A at the end. And Noah, who is our office administrator, is going to be reading off those questions when we get to that point. And he also is available for any technical assistance if you wanted to put that in the chat as well, or send him a private message in there. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And we are so excited to have Tom Allenson with us today. He's a bird watcher, a biologist, and a member of Detroit Audubon. And he's lived in Corktown since the mid-'80s and has been able to experience seeing a lot of birds in his backyard. So we asked him if he would share what he's seen and some of his experiences of birding in Detroit. So we are looking forward to this presentation. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Well, thanks, Sarah. Welcome to everybody who's able to tune in at noon on a Tuesday. I have been attempting to make myself useful as a volunteer for Detroit Audubon for a while now, and signed up to lead a tour at Elmwood Cemetery. And all our field trips got canceled, and we'll be starting to run again in real time and actually outdoors. But for the time being, we're going to do video conferencing. So what I plan to do here is have kind of a seasonal tour through a bird watching season in my backyard. And I live in Corktown, which is the first residential neighborhood west of downtown Detroit. It's an area where the Detroit Tigers used to play. And most of the neighborhood suffered the loss of American elms and an awful lot of open parking lots for Tiger Stadium. And over the years, many trees and shrubs have grown back in, and there's a lot more in the way of birds and other wildlife to see in this area. Years ago, there were no lightning bugs on my street, but the trees getting bigger. They've been around for a number of years now. We're getting invaded by various mammals too, including possums and groundhogs and even raccoons. Some do damage to your garden and some can do damage to your house. But here we are with the returning wildlife, and there's more to look at here. So I'm going to talk about backyard birds and particularly start in winter. So thanks, Sarah. So 1984 happens to be the year the Tigers won the World Series. I thought maybe they'd do it again, but at least they got to the World Series. But they no longer play here. My yard list has reached 76 birds. I figure anything I can hear or see in my yard or flying over it is fair game. So my 76 species showed up late this May in the form of a summer tanager. So it was a lot of fun to do this, just look outside and what's going on. But let's start in winter because there are fewer types of birds to worry about at that time. So next slide, Sarah. So if you happen to be starting bird watching, wintertime is a great time to do it because there aren't as many things around calling all at once or fluttering about in the leaves of trees. and you can get nice and familiar with the things that are around. We are able to get downy woodpecker on suet. A number of species come to seeds. Chickadees and red-breasted nuthatches. If you're in an area that has any kind of pine trees, you have a chance to see a red-breasted nuthatch in the wintertime. Some other seed-eating birds include junco tree sparrow and bright red northern cardinal. And around downtown Detroit, we see a lot of American robins, or your common backyard robin, all year round. Most of them in the winter are males that are eating berries off of shrubbery around buildings. What we always have are introduced species of house sparrows and starlings. So you can get familiar with them in the winter and know what they are when spring and summer come around. And also when you're attracting birds to your yard, you attract predatory birds. Our neighborhood has a number of Cooper's hawks. I've scared a couple of them out of my yard just this winter. And I've found birds hiding in my old Christmas tree I got in the corner of the backyard while the Cooper's hawk is sitting on the fence over their head. Next slide. So winter gets old, I guess, and around February, the sun can come out and get a little warmer. And there are a couple of species of birds that have been around all winter, but I don't tend to see them in my yard until they start moving around and thinking about getting together in pairs. And one of these is the house finch that's on the left. It's a male and a female. I think we've got a little bit of courtship behavior going on there. And on the right is the American goldfinch. And they spend the winter in groups in areas where there are a lot of weed seeds, like open fields with some shrubbery to hide in. But I start seeing them coming around to the thistle feeders once in a while in the winter, and particularly in February. So let's move into March. It's the next slide. I always look for these two at the end of February or into March, and it feels like spring is finally getting underway. I know the redwings will show up, red-winged blackbird will show up in February because driving around outside the city, I tend to see them. If you go down to Point Moulet in Huron River mouth on Lake Erie, they're usually there by mid-February. Both of these birds spend the winter in the United States. I think the redwings may not go farther south than Kentucky to some extent. So they get a good southerly breeze, and there they are. And both are readily attracted by seeds, and the grackle is big and bossy enough to chase other birds off the feeder. And it likes to pick out its favorite seed by knocking other ones on the ground, which is helpful for the cardinals. So continuing through March, and next slide, please. We'll start seeing these still cold weather birds. The dark-eyed junco on the left is around all winter. I have a distinct impression that the ones that are with us in the winter are leaving by March. But then there's some other ones that have spent the winter somewhat south of us that keep coming through. So I'll see a half dozen of these, and then none for a while, and then another half dozen 2 or 3 times during March. And by April, they've moved on north. The kinglet is a very, very attractive small group of birds. They are very, very small. They're the smallest thing next to a hummingbird that you might see around here. Very active in insect eating. They're finding tiny little insects on tree twigs and bushes. And they're notable for, in addition for moving fast, they have very strong wing bars. This black and white mark on the wing is very strong in this group of birds. And if you look at them long enough, you might be able to see the color on the top of the head. Okay, next slide. I always hope to see a song sparrow before April 1st, and this year we did. And they will nest in our alleys and a number of vacant lots around the area here. They're a pretty common bird. Their main feature is they like to sing a lot, and they have a central breast spot, a bigger clump of spots in the middle of the breast, some striping on the head, and a reddish brown tail. In contrast to that is very much a migrant bird, the fox sparrow. It's similar but bigger than the song sparrow, and you may see some differences between the two with them side to side. And the eastern subspecies of the fox sparrow that we generally get is extremely bright red, or rufous red mixed with brown and gray. Very attractive bird. See it early in spring and late in fall, and they're often gone. Next slide. Some more blackbirds show up as the season progresses. I happen to see something like 200 rusty blackbirds. It's becoming a bird that's less common these days. They don't nest here. They travel on to the Canadian prairies in areas north of here. In the spring, they're a very dark black and a contrasting yellow eye. And they make a bit of noise. It's not quite as loud as a red-winged blackbird. Fun to see. On the right is a pair of cowbirds. This is a parasitic bird that lays eggs in other birds' nests. The male has a very glossy black body with a brown head. And then the female is pretty much light gray all over. Next slide. And I love to see these birds. White-throated sparrows will spend the winter in the city, hiding in shrubbery and making little peeps. But you know it's spring and it's on its way when you hear these things singing. The white-throated sparrow on the left and center comes in two color morphs, both of which pass through the city. And they nest in northern Michigan and up into Canada. The song of the white-throated sparrow is like a major fifth, followed by a trill, and it's been put into words as "Oh, sweet Canada." Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada. Or Old Sam Peabody. I think you have to be from New England to appreciate that one. But both of these color phases of the white-throated sparrow have the white bib right under the bill. And they have streaking on the head, but it's in different color. Then a similar species on the right, and they show up a week or two later than the white-throated sparrows, is the white crown sparrow. And its song starts the same as the white-throated, but ends in a buzz. And it has very strong black and white striping on the top of the head and a big area of gray on the neck and then a brown back. And these stuck around for a month for us. They're very fond of seed on the ground. Next slide. As the weather gets a little warmer, the ruby crown kinglet will show up. This one doesn't tolerate cold as well as the golden crown kinglet. But again, it's a tiny little bird with a strong wing bar, both black and white. It has a lot of white around the eye, and if you look very closely and are lucky, you can actually see the red tuft on the male's head. It helps a little to have it in hand and show it to the camera. On the right is a woodpecker species that makes quite a bit of noise called the northern flicker. We have the yellow shafted variety, which has yellow under the wings and tail. And they like to be on the ground a lot for a woodpecker. One of their favorite foods is ants. And again, we're getting nicely into April when the flickers show up. Next slide. Other things that are cruising through this time of the year is the first of our woodland brown thrushes. This one on the left is the hermit thrush. It has a little bit of spotting on the breast and a rufous red tail. So if you see a bird out in your yard that looks like a half of a robin, because they'll walk across the grass and run along things same manner and hold itself upright in the same manner that robins do. It has a reddish tail but a brownish back. You've got a hermit thrush in your yard. And these will be around. They may not be the same birds. I see them for at least a month. And another one in April is over on the right here. There's the littlest sparrow in our neighborhood called the chipping sparrow. They like grassy areas with a couple scattered trees, and apparently a boulevard treatment in the middle of the city is just perfect for them. They'll make nests in the lower branches of those trees. And they have a trilling song, a chip, repeated quickly. It has a black line through the eye, a white eye line, and a nice bright red cap if it sits still long enough for you to enjoy that. Next slide. Again, sticking in April, and we get our first house wrens, which are usually heard before they're seen. They like to run around in the shrubbery along horizontal branches or on logs on the ground, look for insects and spiders. They have a very loud, explosive song. And if they get real happy with us, they'll take to a nest box. Another thing I see in mid-April is this bright blue jay. It was many years ago that I finally became aware that blue jays are migratory, because you see them all year, but they may not be the same birds in the winter as in the spring and summer. For some reason, in our neighborhood, we don't have nesting blue jays, but being a half mile from the Detroit River, I believe we're on a pretty strong flyway. And some mornings in April, I'll look up and see 50 or 100 blue jays cruising along just above the treetops, and then 50 or 100 more 10 minutes later. Next slide. Thanks. Okay, on this slide, we're going to admit that I'm not taking these photographs. The picture of the rose-breasted grosbeak, which is a very striking bird if you can get it out in the open. They're hard to see in the trees, even though it's bright black, red, and white. It is a difficult bird to photograph if you're using a cell phone camera from your back window. But on the left, there actually are two male rose-breasted grosbeaks on my bird feeder apparatus here, although they're shunning my oranges for the moment. The one on top, yeah, you can actually see the red triangle on the breast. And when it flies, it shows a lot of white in the wing and white in the tail. It's a very showy bird. And going along with my seasonal approach here, this is the time of year when our bleeding hearts are out in full glory, the plant on the right. Next slide. And as the season progresses, we get warmer, loving birds. It's not fully spring, or this year it wasn't all that warm in the end of April. But here are two birds that will come to oranges if you cut them in half and put them out in the yard. In my last photo, I had some oranges out there in a bell-shaped container. It didn't seem to work too well, but I'll show you in a bit that the Oriole feeder, where the oranges just stuck on a pike basically, is pretty good for attracting these. Both of these birds will come to oranges and grace your backyard with their presence. The catbird likes to hide in the bushes and has a pretty melodious song. The Baltimore Oriole will nest at the ends of long tree branches. Sometimes willow trees is good for them. They'll make what's called a pendulant nest, or a bag that's hung from the end of the branch. This is an extremely showy bird. The female is pretty yellow, but the male is an orangey red with black and white, and is quite a thing to see. It also shows a lot of black and white when it flies. Next slide. We have a nice picture of a couple of ground-loving birds. On the left is what we used to call a rufous-sided towhee. It certainly is rufous-sided. The female comes in chocolate brown, and the male is another black and white job that, when it flies, shows a lot of black and white in the wings. These readily come to seeds, and they love to get in the leaf litter and kick with both their feet to see what's under there. And I think they're redistributing my seeds sometimes. Sometimes they get lucky and find some insects. The towhees can sometimes be around all winter if you're in a good spot. The Belle Isle winter bird feeder has had them many years. Another bird that loves the ground is another one of our brown thrushes. On the right here is the Swainson's thrush, which is pretty similar to that hermit thrush that I showed earlier, although it has a brown back and a brown tail. It has a buffy brown effect along the bill and around the eye, or brownish spectacles, which is its major feature when you're looking at it. Next slide. Since we're talking about thrushes, here's a page from an old Roger Tory Peterson field guide that I happen to have. It's actually a second edition and is now 40 years old. Some of the bird names have changed. But this is a great device to use if you're unfamiliar with thrushes. And what we have are different themes of brown with or without red and various amounts of streaking around the breast. But the Swainson's thrush that I pointed out is the only one that has the buffy spectacle along the eye, and there's a little more buff on the breast and the side of the face there. The gray cheek thrush above it actually has a gray cheek, but that's very difficult to see. But it has all gray, grayish brown from head, back, and tail. And without the spectacles, you can be pretty sure that that's a gray cheek thrush. In the middle is the hermit thrush that we showed earlier. That has the red tail, and it also likes to bob that tail up and down. And that's a behavior character that it has. A few other birds do too, not the other thrushes. Second from the bottom is a woodland bird called the veery, which instead of grayish brown is more of a almost reddish brown, kind of a rich brown. Again, very evenly colored for the whole length of the bird, and very little streaking on the breast, as opposed to the gray cheek, which has pretty pronounced streaking. And the one that happens to show up latest in the spring, the wood thrush at the bottom, has a brown tail, but a reddish head and shoulders, and very pronounced streaking, and it's a little bit wider body than the other guys. And they're about the same length, but the wood thrush has been described as a pot-bellied bird. So you can tell it by its size, shape, and the time of the year that it shows up. I've only heard one of these singing in migration, and that was the wood thrush. They're on Belle Isle now, nesting in the woods, and you can hear them singing out there. Next slide. More things in late April and early May. The chimney swift is a bird you can see all over the city. They spend most of their day in the air catching flying insects, and they nest and roost in actual chimneys. Presumably before there were chimneys around, they were nesting in hollows of trees. But this really suits them. They like an open thing they can circle around at night and then dive into and spend the evening. Another late April, mid-May bird is the brown creeper. There's a little brown job here in the center. It's white underneath, but most of what you see looks like bark. And there's a slightly decurved bill, and it reaches in crevices in the bark, pick out spiders and what have you. And it's almost woodpecker-like, with it uses its tail to support itself on a tree. Its main approach to feeding is to fly to the bottom of a tree and work its way around in circles as it goes up the tree. So nuthatches often work their way down a tree, which is another bird that feeds on tree bark. On the far right here is a bird I don't see too often, but if you have a good place to hide in your yard, like a wood pile, some low-growing shrubs, the winter wren is a bird of northern bogs, and is a good skulker. And is so small, it acts and looks like a mouse. Even the tail is very short, which in wrens is always held up above horizontal. Another bird, yeah, the woodcock's good. Along the same time of year, the woodcocks are moving through. I may get more of these down here because we're near the river, but I didn't see one this year. But I often surprise them when I go to take out the garbage or something. They are basically invisible in the leaf litter. The best look I got at one of them was we made a late April field trip out to Point Pelee in Canada, which is the premier bird watching spot in the region here. And it was one of those nice April days where I think the birds had come and gone, and we didn't see that much out there at Point Pelee. Well, we got back, and a little bit of our garden we had just spaded over had black dirt, and this brown and black bird stood out quite well on the freshly turned earth. So a bird that was not visible at Point Pelee was 2 feet from our back wall. Next slide. And as spring progresses, they sometimes get some more brown birds. And if you could see, one on the left here is a brown thrasher, which is actually related to the catbird. Looks different, but it is pretty noisy singer. It likes shrubbery, but it'll come out on the grass and into our raised beds and whack away looking for worms and insects. This thing is bigger than a robin and has a longer tail. And a pretty striking bird. It's kind of a reddish sort of brown all throughout the back and tail. Another little reddish brown job, these are becoming more numerous on the right, is the Carolina wren. This is a bird that used to have a little bit more southern range than Michigan, but I've noticed them nesting at U of M Dearborn along the Rouge River. And we've had these most springs. I'm not sure if they nest around in Corktown or not. Next slide. Okay, we are definitely into spring if we can see these two. On the left is a Savannah sparrow. You birders out there, and remember we saw a song sparrow earlier. Notice that this one does not have a central breast spot, and it's got a almost yellow buffy line over the eye, a little bit of chestnut on the wing, and it does not have the reddish brown tail of the song sparrow. It has a distinctive song, Savannah. This bird shows up most springs in our yard at least once, and if you know our neighborhood at all, the Tiger Stadium was torn down about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And it stood there empty for a long time. It was a 10-acre site. It grew up to weeds for the most part. And Savannah sparrows actually showed up there and were breeding. It's something I had not seen very often in the neighborhood, but as a breeding bird, it's totally new to me. It is a grassland bird. And as Detroit Audubon advances through its grassland bird project, we might encourage a few more of these in the city of Detroit. On the right is another grassland bird. This is a flycatcher called the eastern kingbird. It flies out from fences and posts and catches wasps and bees and other large flying insects. they'll pass through our neighborhood, and I have seen them nesting in Belle Isle and in areas of large abandoned industrial lots not too far from here. They're visible in some of the city parks along the river too. Next slide. Okay, we are definitely in mid-May when these guys show up. Scarlet tanager is one of the last things to move through the area. It's a brilliant bird that, despite its colors, is actually well hidden in the green of tree leaves. But you can get them out in the open, again, with the half orange. This is a great way to see these birds. There's nothing in our area that has this color of red, a vermilion sort of color, along with black wings and tail. Extremely striking bird. The females are pretty much green, a little bit yellow, with not quite black wings. In the middle here is a flying bird, catches insects on the wing. They show up right around May 17th or so, from the 14th to the 20th, I think. We've seen them every year. They love cities because the lights attract flying insects, which they can catch. It's a pretty striking bird if you can get a look at it with the white marks on the wings. They make a great deal of noise, and they have a peculiar courtship display that involves diving on towards a building roof. And then the air goes through their wings or tail and it makes a buzzing sound. Another late spring migrant in the lower right is the least flycatcher. And this one's not a real big bird, and it's in a group of flycatchers that have diverse habitats. The least flycatcher likes dry uplands with a mix of grass and shrubs, and it's an all gray bird with 2 strong wing bars. There's 3 closely related species, a little bit of buff and yellow on them. Next slide. Okay. Mid-May is time for warblers. In early May, there's a few of them that sneak in. The first warbler I usually see around here, and sometimes they'll show up in the winter time in secluded enough habitat. The one on the left is a yellow-rumped warbler. It's blue, gray, and black and white with interspersed with random yellow spots. The one that's not showing is the one it's named for on the yellow rump. This will act like a flycatcher, get out on the end of a twig and go after airborne insects. Another fairly early one is middle left, the palm warbler. This is all yellow with a little bit of streaking, a red cap, and it likes to bob its tail up and down. It's a pretty handsome bird. The upper right is a ground-loving bird that waddles about on the ground, looks and acts like a thrush, but is much smaller. Has very heavy streaking, pink legs, and a bright orange stripe across its head, down the length of the head. And when these things start to sing, you know the things have warmed up for you. They practically scream a 2-syllable thing: teach, teach, teach. Below that is another yellow, noisy bird that hides in the shrubbery, the common yellowthroat. It's very strongly yellow underneath. The male has a white and black pattern on the face. It looks like a black mask over the eye. Next slide. More warblers. Here we go. We have a lot of these in vacant lots around here, and they don't mind the shrubbery in some of our alleys. The yellow warbler is a very bright bird. Sings a pretty happy little song and has bright red streaking on the male. In the center is a Nashville warbler that nests north of our area. And it's another smallish bird with a lot of yellow underneath. We notice it has a gray head, and the gray extends onto the neck, and it has a strong white eye ring. And you can be sure it's a Nashville. You see the yellow goes right up to the bill. It covers the whole neck. Down in the lower right is another ground-loving warbler. It's similar to the ovenbird, but it actually likes to be on the edge of puddles of water. And it picks up insects off the edge of ponds where it nests. They do nest in this area if you have wet woodlands. I can think of one park in north of Port Huron that has these nesting in them, called the northern water thrush. Next slide. Okay, all three of these are very colorful birds that like the understory of a woodland. And chestnut-sided on the right is more of an edge sort of bird where there are patches of woods and open areas. All three of these are very brightly colored, very distinctive, especially in the males in the spring. The black-throated blue warbler is well named and descriptive, and it has this interesting white patch on the wing that's also present in the female, although it's just kind of a drab olivey brown bird. Lower right is a brightly yellow warbler, and notice there's no streaking on the breast, with a bright black cap. So it looks like a warbler version of a goldfinch a little bit. And all these are insect-eating birds. And they're very busy at the leaves and small branches of shrubbery. Next slide. This slide is to announce the arrival at the very end of May and going into June. So when the peonies are out, better look for your last warblers. Next slide. One of the last warblers that comes through here on the left, and I couldn't help myself but use an illustration from John James Audubon's Illustrations of North American Birds. And he is quite fond of putting in a little bit of native vegetation and some hints as to what this bird does. It also shows the male and female plumages, the male in the center having a black head and neck and orange on the breast instead of yellow. But both of them have orangey yellow in the middle of the tail, which is pretty distinctive for this bird. These guys are easier to hear than see because by the 1st of June, the leaves are very much out on the trees. But they'll stay around, and they nest both north of here and in our area. And as all the flying insects are out in their glory, the eastern wood pewee shows up. This guy is a little bit bigger than the least flycatcher, has wing bars that aren't quite as prominent. And in June, you can hear it singing in the woodlands, including on Belle Isle. There's a pee-a-wee, kind of sad little song that says migration is about over. Next slide. So again, using our home photography methods, here's a view of our backyard. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what birds we attract and how we attract them. We're trying really hard not to have pigeons, and pigeons like millet seed. So we find a seed mix that excludes that. But we found out over the years that we get a lot of the birds that we like to look at with thistle seed, which definitely attracts finches, like goldfinches and house finches. We'll also see redwings trying to eat those little tiny seeds. Euler sunflower seeds, they're like the half-size dark black sunflower seeds. Very good for winter birds. Cardinals absolutely love them, and so do nuthatches and certain woodpeckers if they get them. The suet feeder goes on for most of the winter, so I can see our local downy woodpeckers and see if any red-breasted nuthatches show up this year. And then in the middle of April, it's recommended to start putting out something orange in your yard, which is a color that orioles are attracted to, and to put a half an orange on there is even better. So we bought this thing. It's actually called an oriole feeder, and it has a device that will secure an orange, half orange to the top of it, and a little platform that the birds can sit on and eat grape jelly. For some reason, grape jelly is the thing for a number of birds, including grosbeaks, orioles, and our ever-loving house sparrows that are always with us. Next slide. Here's a shot of, this wasn't me, but someone I know got very close to this oriole without disturbing it for a cell phone picture. And there's an oriole being very happy on a half an orange. And I also want to show to the left, we bought this 1-inch mesh cage to discourage larger birds so that smaller birds could come in and feed on the suet. We found that the house sparrows fit right through there very handily, and they would eat all the suet pretty quickly. So I took a standard suet feeder, it's just a little wire box, and secured that with wire underneath this other thing. So it's a double feeder. And if the house sparrows are going to eat my suet, they have to go upside down, which is, so there's a house sparrow on there right now. But they're very talented, very versatile birds, and will eat just about anything that's out in the yard. So next slide. We do get hummingbirds. I have not seen them in spring in our yard. I planted some columbines, which bloom gloriously in their second year this spring. And it's a nice tube-shaped flower that allegedly hummingbirds will come to in the spring. The only native hummingbird here, sometimes get an odd one from out west, is the ruby-throated hummingbird. They're around all summer and migrate in August and September. I can attract them to red petunias and other tubular flowers like red salvia. Earlier webinars mentioned the native bright red cardinal flower, to the lobelia family that likes to be in fairly wet soil, which we don't have. And we have an example of the male on the left, and which is probably an adult female on the right that doesn't have the ruby throat. And the immature males you see in the fall have little flecks of red on their neck that otherwise look like the females. Next slide. Okay, all the birds that we see in the spring are likely again to see in the fall. So it's fun to keep an eye out there for birds as they pass through. The hummingbirds are definitely in migration in August and into September. And that's when I usually see them in our yard. The nighthawks will leave us just about Labor Day, and sometimes you can see large flocks of them moving south. And the chimney swifts stick around till about the middle of October, and then one day they're gone too. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about getting out of the backyard and going to other places in the city. And the places I'm going to highlight are places that have a little more woodland or tree cover than other parts of the city. So the first place I'd like to go to is the next slide is Belle Isle. And Belle Isle is a 960-acre park. It is still owned by the city of Detroit. It was run as a state park by the state of Michigan under a lease arrangement. I volunteer at the Belle Isle Nature Center, and hopefully they'll be able to open sometime soon so I can start volunteering there again. One of the best places to bird for woodland birds on the island is north of the baseball fields along a canal called the Nashua Canal, which now has, I think, several pairs of beavers. They have a lodge and some holes in the bank there. On the left is this May, and an awful lot of water on the island. The canal is quite full of water. And on the right, I took a little picture farther up the canal of some fall foliage. So this is a great place for both spring and fall birds and for nesting wetland birds, or nesting birds now that we're in the middle of the year. Belle Isle has people have recorded 255 species of birds on Belle Isle. You can see everything there from grassland to woodland, wetland, and shorebirds. Although shorebird habitat is a little iffy, especially in high water. And definitely birds out in the river, including bald eagle, a variety of winter ducks that like to dive and catch fish or glean things off the vegetation under the water. So there's an amazing variety of habitat, at least 200 acres of woodland. So it's a great place to get familiar with. And one way to do that is to wander through the Detroit Audubon's website. On their opening dashboard, they have a spot called Birding. And you click on that and it'll give you in a list Detroit area hotspots, some of which are in Detroit, and Belle Isle is one of those. And if you hit the button for Belle Isle, another button comes up and says, view Alan Chartier's birding page. So he maintains a blog. He's an expert birder from our area. And he has run a bird banding program on Belle Isle for many years, and has, I believe, moved it out to Lake St. Clair Metro Park. I'm still calling it Metro Beach in my head. But he sets up bird banding in the spring behind the Nature Center in the woods there. And is quite familiar with all our birds. He's one of the top bird listers for Belle Isle and a number of other places around our area. Another place to go on the north side of Detroit is Palmer Park, which is between 6 Mile and 7 Mile on the west side of Woodward Avenue. It has the famous log cabin that was built by the Palmer family. This is not your pioneer cabin. It was built in the late 1800s. And features a lot of leaded glass, and so this was not the original settling sort of housing. But it's a very interesting place. I can go on eBird and see that 100 species have been reported in that format online for Palmer Park. And there's a little web link there to eBird. There's some orchards on the south entrance to the park, just north of 6 Mile. This is this other picture. There's a fair amount of woodland, both near the Detroit Golf Course and the western edge of the park, and between Woodward and this Park Drive. It's shown in the picture on the right. That's a good spot to go. Another one, moving to the southeast side of Detroit. This is not far from Belle Isle. It's on East Lafayette Boulevard and near Mount Elliott. There's 2 large cemeteries there. Elmwood being one of them, which is always open to the public through this grand entrance here. It's just north of Lafayette Boulevard. And this is a popular destination. Detroit Audubon tries to do a field trip here just about every month of the year. We missed ours in March because of COVID-19. But it's always open. You can go there yourself. There's a nice creek and pond after you go to the left of the entrance, and a fair amount of trees and bushes and a couple of 100 acres of very lightly used area, and very historic cemetery as well. Okay, next slide. This is a park that Detroit Audubon has been using a little lately for field trips and including taking school groups. It's called Eliza Howell Park. It's along the Rouge River. And one way to get into it is off of Fenkell Avenue, which is one of our mile roads, and it's something like 4 mile. You can actually get to it easiest probably off of Telegraph Road, which is just outside of Detroit. Turn on Fenkell, and then you're right there on the west side of the Rouge River. So this has fields and a lot of floodplain forest. The floodplain continues from Dearborn up and north into Detroit, and goes on for several miles along various branches of the Rouge River. It's very good for spring and fall birds and a number of other things. Next slide. I put this one in because it is the completed prairie project that Detroit Bird City put together with the Detroit Audubon Society in cooperation with the City of Detroit's Recreation Department, and in consultation with neighbors that live adjacent to the park. At least 2 acres of is basically abandoned grassland has been converted to prairie plants, including some very showy prairie flowers that are native to our region. And one of the fun things you could do with this project is see if we can attract grassland birds into the city. This location is only about a mile from the Detroit River and should be near migratory flyways. And it's just south of I-94 on, I believe, Ferry Street. So it's straight east of Wayne State University, just a little bit north of Warren Avenue. The north-south streets are Elmwood and Moran. So this fall, we got our first picture of a monarch butterfly probably migrating south, and using those native showy prairie flowers there at Callahan Park. Okay, so that's a quick list of some suggestions of places to get out and about in the city of Detroit. Now we're hoping to see more birds. There's someone who's adopted Callahan Park as an eBird hotspot, and I've seen the total grow, including ring-necked pheasant, up to 29 species for this two acre open area. Okay, well, I'm about done. And thanks for everybody who tuned in. And I hope you enjoyed my little seasonal tour. It's fun to show off the backyard.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. We do have a few minutes for some questions. I think there might be 1 or 2 from the chat box. If you want to hang out with us and hear some of those questions. We have Ava, our research coordinator, and Noah on. Our whole Detroit Audubon staff is on right now. So
wow.
The whole team.
On a Tuesday.
So there's one question I see, if I can start over from the Facebook, and then I'll go back to the Zoom because I just saw one there. Amy Russ Higgins wants to know, she said, robins and starlings love the grape jelly too, but do I harm them at all by offering it daily through fledgling weeks?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
Oh, sorry. Hold on a second. I have some things that are making noise in my room. Maybe that'll help. Amy Higgins over on Facebook wanted to know, she said, robins and starlings really love the grape jelly too, but
Oh.
wants to know, do I harm them at all by offering it daily through fledgling weeks?
I don't really know. I don't like to put a lot of it out, and I found that I get the birds, other than I've yet to see a robin on it, but I'm sure that they should like it. And I think grapes are part of their natural food, but the sugar that comes with it may not be so natural. And I've noticed that a lot of grape jelly you can buy in the store has high fructose corn syrup. I did find one, I think it's Welch's, that has cane sugar. So I kind of like to go lightly with that and push the oranges. And for a while there, the house sparrows would eat the jelly, but not the oranges. But after about 3 weeks, they were on the oranges too. But to get the birds I really would like to see, and it doesn't necessarily include starlings, I'm pretty stingy with the jelly. Put it out every third day or so.
Awesome. Thank you. And I meant to say beforehand, but thank you, Tom, for leading this fantastic lecture. Thank you, everybody, for participating with questions. Thank you, Sarah, for coordinating. Thank you, Ava, for answering questions throughout. It looks like we have a few more here. Debbie wants to know, Debbie wants to know on Zoom, is it good or bad for suet to be out all year in feeders? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think that suet's necessary all year. I generally stop when I see the northern migrants leaving us.
Okay.
The whole thing about bird feeding is that to some extent, we're making them feeder dependent.
Mm-hmm.
But to see some of these birds, it is fun to bring them in. One thing, since a lot of birds will have very set paths that they establish in the fall, and that's how they spend their winter, is if you're going to feed them in the winter, have your food out in the fall as it starts to get cold. And that would include suet, and then keep the suet available all winter long. The house sparrows at this point, they're busy eating seeds off the elms. There's various flowering plants that have produced seed by April. They don't in any way, shape, or form need our feed. So I'm doing this a lot for my own amusement, just to get them close enough to see them well. But one thing we'd like to emphasize is that if you start feeding them, to keep feeding them through the whole winter season.
Okay, so establish the consistency is the main goal there.
And then I definitely knock it off when the weather is warm. I stop putting suet out entirely.
Okay, great. We had someone wrote, and I think this was a follow-up to your answer to the first question about jelly. Someone wants to know, what about just grapes?
I suppose grapes would work. You stick them on nails or something. I can see certain of our birds grabbing the whole grape and running off with it. That'd be worth. I'm sure a grackle would be happy to do that. Yeah, when grapes are damaged in the vineyards, the birds are usually pecking at them. So it probably wouldn't have to be attached much more strongly than they normally are in a bunch of grapes. One other thing I didn't mention about the feeder, I have 3 different feeders attached to the same post, but I have a channel on the post itself that keeps squirrels from climbing it. And the way this works is you have to have at least 10 feet of open space so the squirrels can't jump over the baffle from somewhere else or from an overhanging branch. But once the squirrels are excluded, the suet, any bunch of grapes or a half an orange will last a lot longer than if the squirrels are able to get to it.
Terrific, thank you.
When I scatter sunflower seeds, scattering sunflower seeds gets the squirrels going on the ground. And they keep looking at my baffle, but they haven't figured out how to get through it.
Uh, Gabrielle Sharp wants to know, she is having trouble attracting any hummingbirds. Do you have any suggestions for that?
One of the strong suggestions, um, woodland, planting native flowers like woodland phlox, which is a pale blue flower. It's supposed to bloom in April when the hummingbirds might show up, but it's strongly blooming in May, along with our columbine here on the left, which allegedly is April, but it seems to be early May when it's really blooming. Those two are supposed to attract hummingbirds, and I've heard that hummingbirds see the color red. So you have a tubular flower that comes in red. I've seen a red penstemon, which is a nice tubular perennial. I have seen it in a bright cardinal red. It may attract them, and those are spring flowers. A hanging basket of red petunias has done wonders for us. It's not a native plant, although there is a wild petunia. But these non-wild ones, I've actually seen the hummingbird check out our backyard, see the hanging basket off our back porch and head straight to it. So then we have a hummingbird that's at arm's length from where we're sitting, which is a great deal of fun.
Definitely.
I mentioned red salvia. That'll bloom half the season, June into September.
There's a Mr. or Mrs. Klein wants to know, how do we attract I'm not sure if this pileated or pileated woodpeckers. They have other kinds and would like to know how to attract those.
Well, first thing you need are a neighborhood with a large woodlot. I'm trying to think of a record of pileated in Detroit. They may have seen them on Belle Isle occasionally, but there is a 200-acre woody area there. The pileated has been expanding its range. Near Anchor Bay State Park, near the top of Lake St. Clair. There's a good sized woodland in there, and they've had them reported from there. And I think the Metro Park northeast side, somebody can help me out.
The St. Clair Metro Park, maybe?
More inland than that, since I think it's still
Stony Creek?
Stony Creek, yeah. Stony Creek has had pileated, and I think Kensington on the northwest, out near Wixom, has them. But anyway, you could track them. I would put a big block of real suet, like a chunk of cow fat, in a heavy iron cage. So the squirrels and raccoons can't run off with it. It has to be strongly attached. And they will come to that. They'll eat seeds occasionally too. But I have a brother on the woody eastern suburbs of Cleveland. There's a lot of woods and parks around him, and he gets pileated on suet in his backyard.
Excellent. And we just got a comment from Becky that she saw a pileated woodpecker just yesterday. A pileated woodpecker just yesterday in Kensington. So yeah, that sounds about right then. Those metro parks, those woody spaces.
All right. Either I wasn't lying or both of us are.
Paul Emerly would like to know, what about bird baths? What are your thoughts? Good, bad, or indifferent?
Oh, the bird baths are a good idea. One thing I've learned is to either bring it inside or turn it upside down for the winter so it doesn't break by freezing over. If you have a way to heat it, a little electrical wire outside, and you run a bubbler, and you can have water all winter, which is an excellent thing, because water is sometimes a difficulty for birds. It might be more of a difficulty than actual weed seeds and other food sources. Because oftentimes now that we've had a week stretch without rain, there's no water sitting in the gutters. The bird bath is very helpful, and it does help attract birds. Most of the things they use at the theater are also using the bird bath. Or drinking or washing, both are things that they like to do. You need to keep it clean. Like every 3 days or so, brush it out and put fresh water in it.
Excellent. I'm just going back to over to Facebook to see if there's any other questions there.
There was one more question from Lou asking about the scarlet tanager, if they're there all summer.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another bird that likes forests, but we're definitely in the right latitude for them to be breeding. So somewhere around here, they're probably breeding some scarlet tanagers.
Stop. Stop, please. I love you too. I love you too, bud.
Okay. We like scarlet tanagers as well. They didn't, I knew a park south of Cleveland, Ohio that had nesting tanagers. And one hint is they make this peculiar call called, yeah, I'm off my fishing game here. But a titburr song, I think it has to do with talking to their nestlings. So June or July in the middle of the woods it's nice and dark and green in there, and of course the young ones and the females are also green. So that sound will tip you off that they might be in the area. Titburr.
One other comment I'm just seeing, Jill Knoll on Facebook. Hi, Jill. Jill's one of our board members here at Audubon. She said that she saw pileated woodpeckers at Indian Springs Metro Park as well. I'm not sure where that one is, but hopefully some people.
Well, that one's almost up to Holly there. That's got a lot of nice food. A lot of they have prairie habitat up there too, and a nice nature center with a pond. It's definitely worth going. And I've been hearing that pileated has been expanding its range, and I think even showing up on Grosse Ile and some other fairly unlikely spots. There might be enough woods along the Huron River to get a few pairs going. Yeah, pileated woodpecker is one of the birds that enamored me of bird watching. I grew up outside of Cleveland. There's several large metro parks. They call it the Emerald Necklace because they surround the city of Cleveland. And next to my suburb was a 40,000 acre park, mostly of woods, that had pileated woodpecker. And I remember seeing them flying away from me. It's just a black and white thing the size of a crow. They're very skittish and not common at all. And they were hard hit by the removal of timber, the original timber. But they are adapted to secondary or now third growth of timber. So whenever you get a fairly sized woodlot together, you can have these woodpeckers again.
Awesome. I had one more question myself. Oh, actually, incidentally, fun fact, y'all. Boston has an emerald necklace. They call their row of parks in a nice row. They're the Emerald Necklace too. I didn't know Cleveland had one as well.
Yeah.
I had a question to someone's point about bird baths. I have where might you recommend is a good place to get one, or is it something that you can sort of construct and build makeshift yourself? I have a brother with little kids who are just sort of about at the age where they have that little bit more patience and are really paying attention to the bird feeders they have in their yard. And I've noticed that I was in quarantine with them for a while, this spring. And I'm thinking that a bird bath could be a perfect thing for their backyard. Where or what type of place might you recommend to go look for that?
Yeah, I imagine you could make one. I don't know where you'd get the bowl, but you could probably make a stand with wood and a platform. Cut a hole in the platform that the bowl would fit in. Mm-hmm. That probably would work pretty well. Plus, you get to use the pattern saw and cut something out that will fit a circular shape. That's a good project for somebody. But I recommend an area where there's undergrowth of birds can hide in, but not so much for cats. So they're put in a fairly open area with place, and this is true of bird feeders in general, that they're in the open, but there's places they can readily go nearby. Like in my picture here, they can scoot over to that arborvitae. There's a row of arborvitaes on the property line, and rose bushes and other things that are good for hiding in. But the birds are happiest when they know they're safe. They can see hawks coming from above and cats from below. As some of these migrants don't really know about cats, unfortunately. It's good to have a good 10 feet of clear area in all directions, and then places to hide.
Awesome. We've got a few extra comments here. Someone shared that that birds are really enjoying the solar fountain that they have that lights up at night on the bird bath. And
Yeah,
somebody
I
else
saw
has mentioned that their bird bath is a plastic flower pot saucer on a garden table, and that it's very easy to use and clean.
Excellent. That's low tech, and it won't break in the frost much.
I think that's the plan I'm gonna go to my brother with first.
I would start with that. That sounds good.
See how it goes.
You got to repurpose this plastic. I was going to put in a couple of plugs if people are still tuned in. The Yardners.
Yeah, we still have a lot of people on.
A gardening group in St. Clair Shores called the Yardners have an annual native plant sale, and they do it at the Selinsky Green Farmhouse, which is at 11 Mile and Jefferson Avenue. And this Saturday, those of us like me who forgot to put in their mail-in order can pick up what other plants they have at that location. I forget what time of day it is, but the Gardeners are on Facebook, and I believe they have a website as well. So that's where I got my columbines. I found a native plant nursery in Missouri. I got some woodland phlox. Those are also available in other locations around the state of Michigan. The biggest one for native flowering plants is called Wild Type Nursery, and it's in Mason, Michigan. And you're just between here and Lansing. It's almost to Lansing from here on I-90, near I-96. So that's a great place to pick up plants. A lot of these will either attract hummingbirds or produce seed for your fall and winter visitors. And they're good for hiding spots.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for sharing your expertise, and thank you for all of your questions. Thank you, Ava and Noah, for helping out today. And we will be sending out follow-up email to those of you that registered with some more of these information about the birding areas in Detroit, and this PowerPoint, as well as a recording. And we will be having another presentation next week on Birding 101. It's a repeat presentation if you missed our last one in May or April, May. We will be doing that again next Thursday. All the information about our programming is on our website at DetroitAudubon.org, as well as on our Facebook page. And we also send out a weekly or bi-weekly newsletter via email, our Flyway Express. So if you're interested and don't get that, you can send an email to staff@DetroitAudubon.org. And we appreciate you all coming today and spending part of your day with us. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
all of you. All right. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. Someone just asked to get in.